Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sprint 68 review. Let's get started. So I'll start out with the Sprint statistics. Carol will give us a community update. I'll jump over to architecture. Then we'll have Dan on the classic UI, Chris on the service UI. Bronagh will tell us about the providers. Gregg M, a bit on Automate. Gregg T on the platform. Alberto on API, and Chris on documentation. Let's go. For the repo stats, one thing I wanted to point out here is we had a total of 382 merge PRs across 82 repos. When we reviewed some of the repos, the counts that we had, we realized we were including mirrored repos, private repos, forked repos, which really don't make sense because they're not our code. So we changed the query for that, and it turns out we have 82 source repos. So we'll be using that number from now on. As far as the number of PRs closed, the UI Classic had quite a bit with QE doing a lot of work in the integration test side of things. Most of the other stuff looks pretty typical. Next slide, please. From the PR breakdown, we had a good mix again, 23% bugs, 33% enhancements, and a huge chunk, 22% in technical debt. Pretty typical. Next slide, please. We had a low number of PRs merged compared to other sprints. I'm chalking it up to a lot of people were on vacations this past 2 weeks. You're probably going to see a lot of the slides are pretty thin, including mine. And you'll also notice on the last one we have the 82 repos listed there. We might go back and change the other ones, but I don't know if it's worth the amount of work to go back and change that one little number, so I might just leave it. Next slide, please. For the repository health, everything is pretty flat. There were a couple big changes. The ManageIQ UI Classic had quite a big jump, but that's because they cheated. They changed the threshold for some of their tests, and it made their scores go up. On the upside, they're not looking at pointless, like little edge casey kind of things. They're focusing on the meat, and once they kind of get through some of the bigger stuff, hopefully they'll put it back. The other big jump was in the nuage tests. You'll see the coverage jumped 70%. They added VCR tests to cover their test suite, and that was a really nice change. They got a huge bump for that. Next slide, please. Over to Carol.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. So for the community update this week, well, we had two last week in ManageIQ posts since the last sprint, which means that we're getting back to our weekly schedule. Do check them out if you haven't already. They are really interesting posts. And, I really enjoy reading them week after week. And I think if there's a Pulitzer Prize for developer blog, we might have a shot at it because we have some really cool posts. Anyway, also a shout out to anyone who's interested in writing for the Last Week in ManageIQ series to contact John Prowse. We do need writers, give it a shot. You never know what you can come up with. We have, very interesting from different points of view. So really appreciate everybody chipping in. So that's that. And for events, we have a couple of events coming up this month. Actually, one tomorrow already in San Francisco, the Ansible Fest. This time, we actually only have a CloudForms booth because last time in Ansible Fest in London, we had a CloudForms and ManageIQ booth, and it caused a bit of confusion. And it wasn't a very large place, so it didn't make sense to have both booths. So we only have CloudForms booth, but we do have ManageIQ swag there, as well as we have two solution architects from Red Hat representing CloudForms and ManageIQ there, Mike Dahlgren and Kevin Morey. So if you're in the area, feel free to check them out or spread the word. And then there's EuroCool in Budapest. I think it stands for European Ruby Conference. And at the end of this month, and a few of the developers, engineers are going, Julian Chiu, David Helas, and Roman Blanco. So I don't think there's any talks or booths for ManageIQ, but I'm sure there will be a lot of interesting stuff, and our developers will get interesting information and make our ManageIQ project even better. So thanks for that. And that's all from me. Thank you. And next slide, please.
Okay, over to the architecture side of things. We didn't have a lot of changes to report today, mainly because, like I said, most people are on vacation. And then on top of that, we're winding down the architecture, so most people are just refining what they've already done or starting to actually implement some of the changes that they've thought of. Two big things I'll talk about on the platform side of things. Nick Carboni went through and built all new images for all the containers. So the structure now is there's a base image, the ManageIQ base, that's just the source. On top of that are two images, the base worker, which is used for non-service workers, where a service worker is defined as a worker that needs a Kubernetes service. So you have the base worker and then the orchestrator. The orchestrator is the guy who's going to sort of spin up all the other workers. And then on top of the base worker, you have the ManageIQ web server worker, which would be the API and WebSocket workers. And on top of that, you have the UI worker, which adds in the asset compilation on top of those. And he's built all these images and got it working with the templates that we had previously, injecting them where they should go, and seems to be working pretty well. On the automate side of things, we took a quick stab at the end of this architecture to look at automate. Madhu has been looking at, actually for the Kubernetes release, running Ansible playbooks, when we launch an Ansible playbook as an automate method, having it access the workspace. So in order to do that, he needs to do things like serializing the workspace and exposing it through the REST API so that the Ansible thing can talk over the REST API and interact with it. And what's cool about that work is that it actually opens up, from an architecture perspective, us running anything that can talk to the REST API, which means we can launch, if we launch automate methods as containers, you can bring your own language, you can bring your own whatever you want to automate methods. So we're looking at multiple language support. We're looking at launching automate methods with custom images. So if you have some driver that you need to put in there, or some client, you can build your own image and have it in there and not have to worry about what Ruby gems we bring to the table. You can have your own kind of thing. So that looks that sounds really cool, and I'm really looking forward to this. And that's it for architecture. Next slide.
Right. On the classic UI side, there's the PR counts broken out. You'll see enhancements keep coming in through the G release. Bugs, of course, and we've got QE's pretty busy actually creating more bugs for us, so we'll have a lot more of those coming, fixes for those coming. Technical debt was actually pretty high. We're doing a lot of work trying to head towards pluggability. Maybe not so much in 4.6, but we're trying to get as much of it done in advance to help out, to make it easier to make things pluggable in the UI. Along with that, the UI components repo has had some additions and updates as well, so we're trying to push things to components to make things more reusable. On the refactoring side, continued moving constants out of the kind of global area into places where they're used. A lot of the controllers, we're simplifying the methods. Again, that's going more towards the pluggability as well. On that same note, the trees and the Explorer screens have been converted to Angular. This really helps us allow the two sides, the left side and the main area of the UI, to talk to each other and make them more componentized. While that was happening, David noticed that the way we locked the left-hand side, we always locked it by the accordion, which was complicated. You had to figure out which accordion you were on and everything. So he just made a generic lock that locks the whole sidebar, which looks the same, works the same, but a lot easier to implement, a lot easier to use. Enhancement side, a long-awaited enhancement to allow the users defined in ManageIQ, just the simple users, to belong to multiple groups. So thank you, Hilda, for adding that. More custom buttons have been added. More object types that can have custom buttons have been added. We tried to add a lot of the reportable type objects in there, so now you can put custom buttons in a lot more places. We have a screenshot of that. And containers got a new monitoring endpoint added. So next slide. Show some of these things. All right, so there's the standard user there defined in ManageIQ, and belongs to multiple groups. So you can go in there and adjust which groups the user belongs to. It had been supported for external authentications like Active Directory, etc. But now you can do it for internal users as well. Next slide. Custom buttons, we used to support a handful, and then we added a few more last couple of years, and then I think we added like 10 or a dozen more now. So there's a lot more places where you can add custom buttons, and it will show up on those screens, and along with the other enhancements that have been taken place recently with custom becoming a lot more usable. Next screen. And there's the endpoint for monitoring. So now for containers, you can choose the monitoring provider or the monitoring method and find the credentials, etc. for that. And that's it on the classic UI. Over to Chris for the service UI.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. So got two major new features for the service UI. We've added the ability to snapshot from both the service page and from the resource page. So this ability will allow you to, essentially take a snapshot on whatever screen you're at. We've also added the ability to filter by tags, which is a really asked for feature. We've also added this component to Angular Patternfly so that anyone can use it at any time. Next slide, please. Couple other things we've done. We've added Greenkeeper IO to our repo. This is going to allow us to keep our dependencies updated a lot faster. We've moved the code style to standard JS. This should hopefully start a path of making sure there's no inconsistency with coding style. A couple bugs fixed. We fixed an issue with the about model not displaying. We fixed an issue with the session var not being removed on signout. And we've made the timestamps for filters, they're now more human readable as opposed to the ISO time. A couple other things, lots of dependency updates since we've added Greenkeeper. We've updated Yarn, and we increased the test coverage by 2%. And that's it for the service UI. On to Bronagh.
Okay, so I'm going to share an update for 4 providers today. That's Amazon, OpenStack, Hawkular, and OpenShift. Next slide, please. So the Kubernetes repo had most merge pull requests this sprint, followed by OpenStack, and then jointly by Azure and Obert, and then a sprinkling from the rest of the provider repos. Next slide, please. So support for Amazon targeted refresh was completed this sprint. This was a multi-sprint effort by Ladislav and Julian. It's disabled by default, but this can be enabled through advanced settings. And for OpenStack, support was added for cloud volume restore and delete, and security grip add and remove. Next slide, please. So for the Hawkular provider, a shutdown domain option was added this sprint, and 2 bug fixes of note. Now the first one, when adding a JDBC driver, the dialog had some empty fields in it by default, where it should have been pre-populated, so that was fixed. And second, when viewing the utilization page for JMSQ or topic, the UI would crash, so that was fixed. And then for OpenShift, an option was added to skip the saving of unused container images. And this significantly reduces the time and memory usage in environments with a large number of unused container images. That's it for providers. Next slide, please.
Thanks. All right. So for Automate, like Jason pointed out, a lot of us were on vacation. I was out almost the entire sprint, so there wasn't a ton of merging going on, but a couple of things got in. The Automate workspace is the stuff that Jason pointed out in the re-architecture that Madhu's been working on. The table got merged in there, the schema changes, and the big points here are really the API integration and what we're looking towards from the work that I've been involved in lately is around the playbook integration and using Python to talk back into the workspace and make changes into Automate. So we're kind of gearing up around all the work that Madhu's doing and working closely with him to get that stuff integrated. There was a change in the V2V work that was done for Rev that it's now got a dynamic method backing the checkbox for driver selection. So if you're using a Windows platform, it automatically selects it for you. And then Bill, although he was on PTO for a good portion of the month, started working on moving some of the orchestration stuff around to get it moved into provider repos and structured a little better. And like I said, even though I was on PTO, I was encouraged to do some work while I was away. So the next slide, a few things. So I met with some coworkers while I was out. You get Marcel, Zav, PM, and David down there in the corner. I had to crop the image a little bit.
Good idea.
I thought that was make it safe for work. Next slide. See, re-architecture. I spent some time with Kafka while I was there, and also investigated queuing, a lot of queuing, while I was in Europe. And one more slide, I think. Yes, so I had a birds of a feather session. It was the best one I've ever attended. Fit right in. So that was good. And that's really it for all of me. Right?
All right, for now on, I'm going to ask to go before you. So
Okay.
I'll have to follow that up. So on the platform side also, it's a smaller number of PRs that were merged this sprint compared to the previous ones. Only a couple of things of note here. One is that Satoe had added the screen package to the appliance. That'll be convenient when, if anything, like you need to run something that's long running on the appliance. You can leave the appliance, close the terminal, and come back, go to the screen. So people didn't have one for that. And then on bug fix side, there's been some significant work done in external authentication by Joe. Talked about it a bit, some other stuff that he did last sprint, and there's some more stuff this sprint, and I'm actually going to let him go through the hard work that he did in this sprint. So Joe, if you're there.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so the issue that this bug addressed is that the various mechanisms available for MIQ customers to use to authenticate and authorize did not create a user record in the database with a common user ID format. The matrix is large. Sometimes the user ID format will be a UPN format. Sometimes it will be a principal name. Well, not actually a principal name, just a simple username or so the fix was to ultimately, we discussed with the SSSD folks if they could provide us some type of UUID, but that functionality isn't there and it would be difficult for them to do, but they were able to consistently provide us the domain name that the user was logging in at. So because we had the username already and we could get the domain name through updates to SSSD, we decided to settle on a UPN name as what all user IDs will be moving forward. And we could have provided a matrix that would update all user records at once, but to avoid the pitfalls of such a migration, we decided to have the user records be updated as the user logs in. So I added a logic to the code to make sure that when the user logs in, it would check to see what format the user ID is in and try to move it over to a UPN format. This took changes to multiple repos, including changes to SSSD and the Apache modules that the IDM folks provide for us. So I had to coordinate that. It also required changes to 4 of our repos, the ManageIQ repo where the guts of the authentication code was, the GEMS repo where we have the appliance console that's used to configure external auth. The ManageIQ appliance repo had some configuration files in it that got updated, and we updated the documentation. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
That does it for the platform side. Alberto?
Alrighty, so on the API side, we had a couple of enhancements coming in this sprint. So first one by Jillian will be metric rollups. So we have a new collection, API metric rollups, that's being made available. But we also, that's to browse the metric rollups for certain, all of them or certain resources, but we also provide that as a sub-collection to the API VMs and services to query metric rollups for specific resources. So one thing we did do that's new is that when you query metric rollups and you don't specify paging, you'll get paging by default, just because there could be a lot of data. So there's a new settings API metrics default limit that's defaults to 1,000. So you'll get that paging enforced by default. So we have a couple of required parameters: resource type, capture interval, start dates, and optionals, resource IDs, end date, and limits. Date formats is what's supported in the other API calls. So a subset of ISO are listed here. Then I have here a couple of examples. So one being, querying metric rollups for a couple of services with the start date and the limit. The capture interval is hourly. And the other two examples are querying metric rollups for a particular VM and particular service. Again, the same parameters. So you have the start date, end date, and limits. If you want more than 1,000, you can ask for more. But again, use at your own risk. Make sure your data is not that huge. So, but anyways, so that's the new enhancement by Jillian. Next slide, please. And we're starting to see some enhancement for the generic object definition, also by Jillian. So we have the new collection generic object definitions. So we have here showing an example of a resource for that. So essentially exposing the attributes under the properties. You have the attributes, the associations, and methods that are implemented in the model side. Next slide, please. And so we support the CRUD operations. So the creates and the updates essentially work with the same signatures as was shown before. So we have the create, the reads, querying, all of them. For the individual resources, we can access by ID or by name. So that gives them the flexibility. Updates, standard edit signature for that, and the deletes also by ID or by name. We have an upcoming PR that allows more finer granularity on the updates, where you want to add individual association or removing some, but that'll be coming up next sprint. And that's it for the API. Next slide, please.
Hi, on documentation, we have had a rather light sprint due to vacation and some training, but we have had 8 PRs merged, all of which were enhancements. Highlights among them are we've added a ports table for OpenShift container platform providers. There's been some maintenance and updating of the downstream content. We've added an overview of generic objects, and some additional work was done in configuring the downstream for a forthcoming release. That's all. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks everyone. We will see you at the Sprint 69 review on September 20th, and quite a bit of chat in there. Anything? Probably all hilarious stuff to Gregg's presentation. Nope. No questions. Thanks everyone, and good day.